Hello there, this is David McKnight. Welcome to the Power of Zero show. I'm the best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You LERP, The Volatility Shield, and most recently, Tax-Free Income for Life, all of which can be purchased in individual copies. I'd recommend you head over to Amazon or anywhere else you buy fine books. But if you want to buy them in bulk and you want to mix and match purchases, you can head over to davidmcknightbooks.com. And that is the most economical way that you can purchase various copies of my books. If you are looking for help from one of our elite POZ advisors to help navigate all of the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, to help mitigate tax rate risk and longevity risk, all within the very same portfolio, head on over to davidmcknight.com. Happy to hook you up with an elite POZ advisor. If you're a financial planner and are looking for help transitioning your practice to a Power of Zero style practice, we'd be happy to have a chat with you. Head over to powerofzero.com. Of course, would always love a follow on Twitter. You can do so. It's at McKnight & Co, at McKnight & Co. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Joe Biden's proposed, and keep in mind that's proposed, it has to pass Congress, and there's some question as to whether that could happen, but his proposed $6 trillion budget, which is designed to make the U.S. more competitive. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we are already in a position where spending has been sort of continuing on this trajectory that's unsustainable. And so what we're going to be talking about today are some of those expenditures that Joe Biden has proposed and what that's going to do to the fiscal outlook as well as to the debt outlook. By the way, this budget proposal came out at the end of May. You may be wondering why we're talking about it just now. Well, we had a couple of interviews that we had to do, first of all with Dr. Larry Kolikoff and then with Maya McGinnis from the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. I thought that both of those interviews were excellent. I hope you felt the same. And Congress has not voted on this budget yet, but I wanted to get you caught up to speed on, number one, what the budget is and what are the types of things that Joe Biden is proposing within this budget. Okay, so first of all, this budget is $6 trillion. You know, we for a long time, we had budgets that were, in the $4 trillion range. A lot of people think that a $6 trillion budget for an economy that's trying to recover from COVID and sort of regain its land legs is too much too soon. And that ultimately it puts us on sort of this even more unstable fiscal trajectory. We heard last week how Maya McGinnis talked about how the trajectory of the U.S. economy absolutely terrifies her. And I don't think that she's going to be too happy about what Joe Biden has proposed in this particular budget. As always, I'm trying to take as politically a neutral tone as possible here. Math does not have a party affiliation here. Math is what it is. So let's talk about what this budget does. Number one, it's going to introduce or perpetuate, if you will, budget deficits between 1.3 trillion and 1.8 trillion. It's going to be 1.6 trillion in 2022. It'll draw down a little bit to 1.3 for a couple of years, and then it'll end up at 1.8 trillion by the end of the decade. So what does that mean? What does it mean when the deficit is 1.8 trillion? That means that we will be spending money to the tune of 1.8 trillion above and beyond what is brought into the U.S. Treasury via tax revenue under today's tax rates. So where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from debt. It's going to be $1.8 trillion more in debt at the end of the decade. So if we start at 1.6, that means the debt will grow by 1.6 next year. So we're talking, on the order of, another 15 trillion or so of debt by the end of the decade. So if the debt is currently 28 trillion, you can count on it being 42 trillion by 2030. A lot of what has been discussed here is that Joe Biden thinks that this is a sustainable amount of debt to be assuming because of low interest rates. He predicts that low interest rates will continue to stay at low rates. However, notwithstanding his assumption that interest rates will stay low, the cost of servicing that debt over the next decade is actually going to double. So consider what could happen to the cost of servicing all that debt should interest rates simply return to historically normal rates, which is about 5%. So under this projection, interest rates stay relatively sustainable. However, should that projection not hold up and interest rates return to historically normal levels, then this picture changes entirely. So what is he hoping to do with this budget? He's hoping to help Americans attain the comforts of a middle-class life, and he's hoping to lift the U.S. industry to a point where it can compete on a global scale in a much more competitive way. By the way, I will attach in the notes one of the articles I'm basing a lot of my comments off of is a New York Times article entitled "Biden to Propose $6 Trillion Budget to Make U.S. More Competitive." Again, this happened about 2 weeks ago. However, nothing's really changed in the interim. So this is not something that's been voted on yet, but it's something that I think that we all need to be aware of as we move forward into time, into a future where we are already on very, very unstable fiscal footing. And I want you to sort of envision what all this additional spending might ultimately do for those already, that already tenuous fiscal future. So the article says the levels of taxation and spending in Mr. Biden's plans would expand the federal fiscal footprint to levels rarely seen in the post-war era to fund investments that his administration says are crucial to keeping America competitive. We're talking about roads, water pipes, so this is infrastructure, right? Broadband internet, electric vehicle charging stations, and advanced manufacturing research. So that's sort of the part of the budget that calls for making the economy more competitive, shoring up gaps in the infrastructure, modernizing things, increasing internet. That's that part of it. But there's also the sort of the shoring up of social programs, including affordable childcare, universal pre-K, and a national paid leave program, all of which the Republicans over time have balked at. Military spending would also grow, but it would grow at a smaller, as a share of the economy would actually decline because it assumes that the economy is going to get bigger over time. How is Joe Biden going to pay for this? Well, he has campaigned on the promise that he's not going to make middle income earners pay for this. Well, there is actually some news here, and I will bring that news to you shortly. But how is he going to pay for it? Well, he's going to raise taxes on corporations and high earners. We've already know that if you're in the top 1%, if you're making more than $400,000 or so, you find yourself squarely under the scope of the IRS. Administration officials have said that jobs and families plan would be fully offset by tax increases over the course of 15 years, which the budget request also anticipates. So in other words, he's layering on a whole new level of spending, but he's not increasing, he's not deficit financing it. So that's, I think, an important consideration. So he's raising revenue. So he's not simply borrowing money to be able to pay for all of these new spending initiatives. That said, why is the debt continuing to go up on average, about $1.5 trillion per year? Well, that's, of course, all of the unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So in other words, his budget does not contemplate changing any of those programs, okay? It only contemplates increasing discretionary spending by increasing taxes. It does not contemplate changing non-discretionary spending for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and it does not contemplate raising taxes to be able to pay for those things. So what that means is that 10 years from now, we'll find ourselves in a position where we have $42 trillion of debt and really sort of have painted ourselves even further into a corner. Very important. In this document that informed this article about the Joe Biden budget, it does not call for the continuation of the tax cuts for low to middle income Americans, which Donald Trump signed into law in 2017. In other words, he's letting those, according to this budget, and you know how he's planning on coming up with the revenue to pay for all this stuff. He is coming up with the revenue in part to pay for this stuff by letting those middle income taxes expire. Okay, I have long talked about how there are three different ways that this could go. There's the Ed Slott way that this could go, which Ed Slott says, hey, this is, the economy is in such rough shape that they're going to have to raise taxes next year, right? 2022 tax rates are going to go up on everybody, broad-based tax raises on everybody. I don't tend to share that. There's the approach that I've adopted, which says that at some point in time, Joe Biden will extend the tax cuts on middle America, okay? It may not happen this year, may not happen next year. This particular budget does not call for it happening this year. I think it could happen. And if it does happen, it will simply extend the tax cuts for another 8 years because he's not going to get the 60 vote filibuster proof margins that he's looking for to make it permanent. So it'll be an 8-year extension of those tax cuts. And there's a third alternative that simply says that he'll let these tax cuts expire January and will revert to 2017 levels in January 1st, 2026. According to this budget, that's the option that's going to play out. However, there are sources within the White House that say that he is likely going to address extending those tax cuts at some point in time, but he doesn't call for doing that in this particular budget. So that's an important distinction. All right, so the total debt held by the public would more than exceed the annual value of economic output, rising to 117% of the size of the economy by 2031. By 2024, debt as a share of the economy would rise to its highest level in American history, eclipsing a World War II era record. So Republicans are obviously up in arms about this. They're afraid that we're going to be saddling the economy with dangerous levels of debt. And you're not going to be able to honor your pledge to not raise taxes on the middle class if you continue to raise these debt levels. Okay, so in other words, they're saying it's unsustainable to be able to say middle America is not going to pay more tax if you let debt levels grow to $42 trillion per year. Okay. The article continues by quoting Michael Peterson. Michael Peterson, I believe, is related to Peter G. Peterson of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. I know that because he is the current chief executive of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. Presumably, there's a relationship there. He's actually encouraged that Joe Biden is not debt financing any of his proposed additional spending. He's actually paying for it by increasing taxes on the wealthy and by increasing taxes on businesses. But one of the things that he brings up, which I think is a legitimate concern, is this. He says, while this certainly projects out more favorably than pure deficit spending, in the end, it will only be as fiscally responsible as our future fortitude to actually stop the spending and continue the revenues. In other words, what Michael Peterson is worried about is that once we raise debt levels to this new amount, once we raise spending levels to this new amount, it'll become the new normal. And it will be very, very difficult to draw down from those spending levels somewhere down the road. So in other words, are we going to have $6 to $8 trillion budgets? Is that the new norm that we are going to be experiencing from now into perpetuity? So that's the risk, is that even though he has shown how he plans on paying for all this new spending, will this level of spending continue into the future, and will we be able to afford it? And I think his answer is probably no. So important distinction. Once again, this is not the budget. It's not been approved. In fact, there are obstacles standing in the way of getting this budget approved. One of which is, as we know, Senator Joe Manchin III of West Virginia, who is a moderate and who tends to not love unrestrained federal spending. He has said that he is not willing to back as high a corporate tax rate increase as what the Biden budget proposes. So that is a consideration. Will they have the revenue to be able to pull this off if they can't get Joe Manchin in their corner? Joe Biden is predicting that all of this can be financed behind the strength of an economy that's going to grow at just under 2% per year. It's also assuming that employment would fall to 4.1% by next year. Currently, it's at 6.1%. And one of the other things that we have to worry about is inflation, right? We are experiencing a bout of inflation lately. A lot of that is because there's so many goods that are flowing into the economy that there are, there's increasing amounts of money that are available, but the goods, as these businesses recover from COVID, the infrastructure is not really capable of getting all of those goods back into the economy. So we have lots of money. People are starting to make money again, but they're chasing fewer and fewer goods, which is causing prices to go up. I read an article that talked about how in California and some of the ports that a lot of these containers have been languishing. It's been very, very difficult to get these products that are being imported from China and Europe into the economy. And so inflation is rising dramatically. Of course, if modern monetary theory gains any sort of purchase within the federal government, then that is going to create even more of a greater money supply, and that's going to ultimately lead to massive levels of inflation. Even if interest rates stay low, payments on the national debt would consume an increased share of the federal budget. Net interest rate payments would double as a share of the economy from 22 to 2031. And once again, this is primarily because of entitlement programs. So, Joe Biden is to be commended that he has all of his additional spending he has paid for with his proposed tax increases. So none of this adds to the national debt. The problem is we are not addressing the current underlying problems which are driving the debt higher year over year over year, and sooner or later becomes a national security risk, right? So this says, the article continues, by 2028, when Mr. Biden could be finishing a second term in office, the government would be collecting more tax revenue as a share of the economy than at almost any point in the last century. So for those of you who doubt tax rates down the road are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, this budget calls for it. So that's the plan. The plan is to raise taxes. The plan is to raise taxes on the middle class starting in 2026. It's going to go back to what they were before. And of course, by 2030, there's going to be so much debt. Interest rates return to historically normal levels. It's going to be so hard to pay the interest on all of that debt. The rich can't do it on their own. They're going to have to be forced, according to Miami McGinnis, to be forced to broaden the tax base so that more and more Americans are going to help finance the cost of all this debt. This is experts are no longer talking about passing this debt on to the next generation, forcing our children to pay for it. More and more experts are talking about how we are going to have to pay for it. This generation is going to have to pay for it. Tax rates are going to have to rise dramatically, and it's going to affect us. It's no more our kids and our grandkids. We are going to be the ones that have to pay for all of this debt. And if you have money in your 401ks and IRAs, guess what? The crosshairs of the federal government is squarely on your retirement account. So, of course, what we're looking to do is to get those dollars repositioned to tax-free. We need to keep an eye on the economy. We need to keep an eye on the fiscal trajectory of our country, because that's a harbinger, if you will. It's a barometer for where tax rates are likely to be over the course of the next 10 years. That's the reason why we have these types of discussions. All right, folks, that's the podcast for today. Stay tuned for more updates on the budget as it gets voted on and what ultimately gets approved in Congress. And we will keep you updated on that. We'll keep you updated on infrastructure, what comes through as far as those types of proposals go. And you can hear it all right here on the Power of Zero show. Once again, if you are looking for help navigating all of these pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, head on over to davidmcknight.com. We'll hook you up with a member of our elite POZ advisor group. And if you are a financial advisor that wants to transition your practice to a Power of Zero style practice, head over to powerofzero.com. You can watch a free 3-video series that talks about it. And you can also download one of my books for free that talks about our POZ marketing revolution. All right, folks, that is the show for today. We'll look forward to chatting with you same time next week.